Hello everyone, welcome back to this sea turtle tutorial. This is going to be session 2. I think there will be 3 more sessions. And I still think I want to add maybe some white bubbles and some splashy bits to it. So I might even do more on this. So stay tuned. But this session is going to be really fun. And by the end of this session, we are going to have most of the markings on. We're going to have most of the turtle covered. We're going to do a wash of worms on the top of the turtle, and we will get a lot of the markings done. And I am going to do so many experimental techniques that are pushing my skills. I am basically what you are watching is me trying out brand new ways of painting for me to really push my skills. So I hope you sit back, relax, enjoy this tutorial, enjoy the process. Don't expect miracles. Get your miles in on the brush though, and enjoy those miles. Don't stress out too much if you have failure, or if it doesn't look the way you want to. Just keep going, keep pushing, keep trying. All right, here we go. All right, the bottom of the turtle leans cool, meaning bluer, greener. The top of the turtle is being hit by warm light. And I think his markings are warm anyway, but it really makes him glow. That's one of the things I loved about this reference, how this turtle just glows in the light that's filtering down through the ocean. So we're going to work in a lot of yellows and oranges for the top of the turtle to really contrast with the cools underneath the turtle. So here I've got my Alvaro Castanet mop brush. Don't need this fancy brush, y'all. I don't recommend it. If you're painting larger paintings, more advanced paintings, yes, but you can just use your 3/4 oval. Just use a larger brush. So you make sure that you get that water distributed across the area well. And I just wet the whole top of the turtle because I'm going to drop in some Holbein Oriole in here, probably about milk consistency. And then when it mixes with the water already on my paper, it becomes tea consistency, right? So I'm just putting on a nice underpainting. This is what we call an underpainting. Putting some down into the fin as well to create consistency across the whole painting. Getting some yellow on that other fin there that I haven't worked on yet, because why not? A little bit of a warm wash over that won't hurt anything. Now I'm getting some more pyrrole orange. And I'm going to roughly keep this pyrrole orange about milk consistency towards the bottom of this shell, because I want the very top of the shell to be almost white because it's getting the brunt of the light. And then as you move down the shell, it gets darker and more orange. So I'm trying to keep this orange in the bottom of this area of water that I just painted on the entire shell and the entire top of the turtle. And I'm just letting this paint mix itself with the yellow that I already painted. I see a lot of worms on this shoulder. So I'm carrying that over. And then there was a bit of orange on the edge between the cool shadow and the white highlight on this fin. So I put that in. I will blend it more later. And putting a little bit of these oranges down into the underside of the turtle, because he does have some burnt sienna type markings that will lean more orange. They'll be brown. And then there I'm blending with a damp brush. Wherever a wet edge meets dry paper, it needs blending. I've got my flat. Doesn't matter if it's a flat. I myself am trying to get more comfortable working with flats. I think they're a nice brush. I'm getting some burnt sienna, trying to get it as thick as possible. Adding in some pyrrole orange to make it a little more bright and colorful. So pretty thick paint too there, getting it pretty thick. And that's the thing with hot press paper. Even if you paint on wet paper, more than cold press, the brush strokes will hold their shape. So I'm looking at the reference and I see some of these lines of wrinkles. So I'm just roughly, impressionistically putting them in. And look how hard edged my marks are, even though I'm painting on damp paper. That's hot press for you. Cold press, I feel like stays wet longer. Hot press, you've got to work a little faster. It'll keep you on your toes if you want any kind of soft mark. And I don't want these super hard edged. I want them to have a little bit of softness. So to get soft marks, you've got to paint on some level of damp paper. But I'm carefully looking at some of the main lines of dark folds in this turtle's skin and putting them in with this flat brush. In fact, this flat brush is really great for this job. You know, cats don't have wrinkles, so I never have needed a brush, a flat like this for many things. But this is coming in quite handy, in fact. This is just a synthetic cheap brush that's flat. I think it's 1 inch. Painting cream consistency on damp paper here. If your paper dries too much, you can let it completely dry, re-wet it, let it dry for a couple minutes, not too long, and then go back in with cream consistency to paint these wrinkles in the turtle's skin and to delineate the shell as well. You don't have to paint every single little nuance though. You can just get in the idea of these wrinkles. All right, getting some fresh cream consistency paint there, burnt sienna, so I can get thicker paint, so I can get darker, more deeper valued, value being how light or dark something is. The wrinkles on this turtle are super dark because the light is pretty strong, so it's creating the shadows inside the wrinkles of his skin super dark. So I want them really stark to coincide with what I'm seeing in the reference photo. So I'm using very cream consistency paint on damp paper. If you do this on dry paper, it will look like stuck on wrinkles. If you paint on too wet a paper, they'll bloom out too much. And what I would do is blot if they bloom out too much on you and then repaint them on the blotted paper. But I loved how my markings held their shape, but yet had soft margins for a dreamy look. The secret to dreamy realism is the edges and how soft you get them. And when you paint with cream consistency on damp paper, they will have a soft edge, but they'll hold their shape. They won't bloom out too much. And if they do, like I said, don't panic, blot it up. If it leaves a little behind, fine. For the skin, it'll just look like texture. And then if you blot, it should dry the paper because you blotted it. So then just go right back in with some thick cream consistency paint and try again. And I'm just roughly painting the impression of the shapes I see, kind of blobs mostly, and some of them are in the shape of lines that follow the wrinkles that contour around the 3D architecture of the neck and the shell. So the curves of your lines that we're putting in here tell the story of how the turtle's body moves through space in a 3D nature. It curves around in the humps over the shell, the round cylinder nature of his neck. The curves of his wrinkles tell that 3D story. So pay attention to that. I'm feeling with the back of my hand is this still damp. I don't want to paint on dry paper. That will look stiff and cut out looking if you paint on super dry paper. This, who knew? Painting turtles and painting cats has a similar rule. If you're going for dreamy realism, you've got to have softness, so much softness, even in the hard-edged areas like these markings. If you paint cream consistency on damp paper, They have just the right amount of softness to the marks to make them look dreamy, yet look how these marks are holding their shape. Again, one bloomed out too much, I blotted. No big deal. If you make a mark and it's too hard edged, you could try spraying it, which will give it an interesting look with a misting spray bottle, or like I said, let it dry completely and come back and try again. And I would recommend that you try these markings on a scrap piece of whatever paper you're working on, whether you chose to work on the Stonehenge hot press like me, or cold press, or Yupo, whatever you choose. Practice some of these markings on scraps of paper. You can paint on the back of most hot press and cold press papers. All right, while these are still wet, actually, I'm going to drop in a little bit of maybe ultramarine blue plus a little red for a purple. While these are still wet, to give them some more texture. Okay, some of them have already dried. But some of these really have some cool texture. And I think they're more interesting looking if they have a little bit more depth to them by putting in some purple, some red, mixed with some French ultramarine. So while these are still damp, if you do it when they're dry, they won't melt into the burnt sienna. They will look like cut out marks of purple on top of brown. However, if your paper is dry, you can go in with a damp brush and blend the purple. But this is a mix of ultramarine blue, naphthol red, and maybe a little bit of burnt sienna to gray it down, although it will gray down because I'm dropping it into thick, wet, damp burnt sienna. Look how natural those look, and look how dreamy they look because we painted them on damp paper. Damp paper for the win, y'all, for turtles and cats and landscapes. And in my opinion, any time you want dreamy realism, what is the underlying principle? Paint on some semblance of wet or damp paper. That's where you get the dreaminess. Let's hear what I have to say here. Okay, now for good measure, while this is half wet, I'm going to give it some sprays just to keep it loose. Now, you don't want to do this when it's too wet. You go in when it's like half dry. All right, I'm just going to let it set up now. All right, are you ready for some fun? Let's just have some fun. This is going to be fun. Everybody's water is going to turn out differently. But here's what I want you to keep in mind. By the way, yes, I'm painting water around the turtle, not keeping his shell bone dry. We want that white highlight along his shell and along the top of his head to stay very white, very bone dry, never get water there. That is going to be the light highlight that holds this whole painting together. So please keep that dry, but you can get everything wet. And this is one of those rare instances where you can make your water really puddling here. Because what we're going to do is get puddles of water here, leave some areas of the, you'll notice I'm not painting the water on the corners of the paper. I guess that's another key thing that I need to remember to remind you. Just put water along the shell. Don't put it up in the corners of the painting because we want the water to run naturally and create rivulets so that parts of the paper stay dry because we want a lot of dry white paper. So don't wet the corners. Just wet with big puddles along the top of the shell and then tilt your paper up, let it run, And then I'm going in with some cream consistency straight from the tube. Look how it's blooming out. That tells you how very, very, very wet my paper is, although I did tilt it up first and let it run off my painting in a natural way. Let the water decide where it wants to go. And then this is called charging, where I charge the blue paint. This is Sky Blue by Rockwell, my rare PB17 paint. Y'all do not worry about paying for this paint. Just get, if you want a very similar color, just get Holbein, Peacock Blue, or any turquoise. Even phthalo blue will make a beautiful blue like this. Don't feel like you need to spend all this money on sky blue. You don't need to do that. On the margins, I'm letting it be more watery here at the tip of the turtle's tail, because we're getting away from the main area of interest. So we want less bold, dark blue against super light white turtle shell. We don't want to call attention to the tushy area of the turtle. So we're going to keep it lighter down here. All right, now I'm going in. This is actually just a tube of paint I'm trying to get rid of. I never use it. It is gorgeous, but y'all aren't going to be able to use it. So because it's so expensive to buy Rockwell paint. So permanent green light will be just as gorgeous. So I'm alternating between permanent green light that I always have on my palette and the sky blue, the PB17 paint. Again, your colors do not matter. Now, I liked some of the architecture of the brush strokes that I was getting from using my flat, but if you don't like that, just spray it more than I do and it will bloom out, blob out gorgeously. Now I'm going in with some cream consistency onto glistening wet paper, and I'm putting a little bit of it here and there throughout. I love those marks. By the way, I want to do a whole abstract painting on damp paper like this and leave those marks kind of square. I just think that's so pretty. Love that effect. But we'll spray it. But this is French ultramarine that I allowed to mix in with the other colors I already had in my brush. So it's making a dark green. And why do I want a super dark blue by the head and neck and where there's that V indentation between the shell and the head? Because that's where I want my viewers to look more than anywhere else in the painting. So that is where my boldest contrast is. My lightest lights against the darkest darks. My hardest edge is there. Because that's where I want my viewers to look. And then I'm spraying the edge of the paint to get it to run more. And while I tilt up my board, how fun is this? And I didn't spray my little square marks too much because I kind of liked them. But you can spray yours more if you want yours to look more watery and less abstract, like I did. It's up to you what style. And I can't wait to see how everyone's water is going to look so different. I can't wait to see what y'all's water looks like with using this technique, because each one is going to look so different. But this was fun. I really enjoyed it. Now I want to attach my water up into an edge of the painting. So I'm going to put some marks up in a kind of a roughly diagonal way to touch the edge of the painting. That's one of Charles Reade's rules, remember? He said, have your subject touch the edge of the painting in at least 2 places. So we have the fin touching the edge, and now we have the green water touching the upper left quadrant. So that kind of attaches your subjects into the painting, so they're not floating in space. All right, now I'm going to soften this edge, because remember, I don't want this to be the most important edge down here by his tushy. I want it by his head. So I'm just using clear, clean water to allow that edge to soften. It's still there, but it's really soft because it's not as an important edge. and then tilting again. And oh, look, some of the burnt sienna got activated and bled up into the painting there. I'm okay with that. Over there on the left, just very light. It'll dry so light. So you can keep working your painting, spraying, blot the drips so the drips don't run back into your painting, by the way, when you put it back down flat. You can also let your painting dry, tilt it up, just put the lower right quadrant corner up on the top of your water jar, for example, and let it dry that way. So the paint continues to kind of run in a diagonal way up into the upper left quadrant. And I made my water, the turtle is jutting up into the right upper quadrant in a diagonal across the painting. So I want this bit of water that I just painted to jut in the opposite direction to provide some directional contrast. It's a contrast in direction. My water is jutting up into the upper left corner of the painting to contrast with the direction the turtle's going. All right, I've got my 1/2 inch flat there again. You can use a round for this work if you don't have any flats. If you don't want to spend the money on flats, don't feel like you need to, you can get this job done without that. But here I'm dampening. Notice I'm not using drippy paint anymore. I'm trying to make it evenly damp. I'm gonna get ready, I do believe, to paint the markings on the turtle's head. And I loved how they came out soft, yet they held their shape. So how do we do that? We paint on not glistening, super wet paper, but where the water's starting to absorb into your paper and be damp, cool to the touch, damp with cream consistency. I'm getting pyrrole orange. I want to mix it with my burnt sienna that's dried on my palette now. So that is really a nice way to get nice cream consistency paint, adding just enough water to activate it. Really thick paint though. And if you have any water in your brush, then blot out the heel like I just did, so that when you make these marks, they don't bloom out too much. They just stay soft on the margins. And that makes for a dreamy marking. It almost looks like it's in a motion blur, but the marks hold their shape here. Getting more pyrrole orange, more burnt sienna for a nice orange leaning pop of color. Now, some of my marks bled out too much and they blobbed into each other. You know what? I let them dry. Just know if your marks blob out a bit and they blur into each other, and mine did, let it completely dry. And because we're working with such thick paint on this paper, and it would be true on Arches Cold Press too, later we can go in and lift back out. Okay, here I mixed in a little bit of ultramarine blue because now I'm putting a little bit of a darker mark into those markings. So to get that chocolate color, I add just a little bit of ultramarine blue to my brush. But later I'll let this completely dry and then I'll go back in with a damp brush and lift out in between these markings to redelineate them, so they don't look so blobbed out. Mine did get a little blobbed out, but not so much that I felt like I needed to blot them up. Okay, I'm getting that's a rigger there. I'm trying to use some push technique, dropping some clean, clear water in between the markings on the white paper to see if I can get them to push back into themselves. I don't think I was very successful. So that's what you see me doing. I'm trying to re-find the lines in between these markings And what I will end up ultimately needing to do is to let them dry completely and lift. And that's the cool thing about working with cream consistency burnt sienna. When it dries, it's really easy to lift when you have it on your paper really thick, and you have to be careful because it reactivates really easily too. All right, I'm going to put some more paint in this area of his nose area, I guess you'd call it. And be careful to pay attention where this edge of this nose color, the orange nose color ends. It kind of frames in the eye, and I could have done a better job getting the shape right here to frame the eye in, because this is the most important place. So this is where you want, if you want tight details, this is where you want them. And I kind of lost the shape of this edge that delineates his nose from his eye socket area. And I like the geometric nature of that delineation in the reference photo. So I was a little bit messy here. And I personally, if I actually have painted this again, and I was more careful with this area. But this is the thing, you can let it dry and then lift and fix things if you don't like how you get this area in. And here I'm actually painting along the bottom of his mouth area to delineate his mouth, since I have the perfect color in my brush right now to do that on dry paper there. And you see I'm feeling that water to see if it's still damp, because if it is, this is a good time to splash some water in it to see if you can get some cauliflowers. I didn't get very much cauliflowering. Mine was kind of too dry, but it would have been pretty if I could have. It's all about timing with these techniques painting on damp paper. Here I'm trying to use my push technique where I drop a little bit of clean, clear water in the white space between the marks to push, because the water, if it works, will push into the paint and make the areas between the marks lighter again. Didn't really work. My paint was too dry and too heavy. All right, there I'm adding in even a little bit of naphthol red. And while these marks are wet, I'm seeing if I can put a pop of red in there. This is the main area of interest. So you want your brightest colors here. You want your hardest edges here, the most details, the lightest lights and the darkest darks. The darkest dark will go in the eye because we'll use black for part of the eye anyway. All right, I've got a smaller flat now, getting some Pyrrole transparent orange. All right, I'm re-dampening this dry area because I'm going to play with putting some more marks in this fin. So I want it damp. But don't put water on this unless it's completely dry. It looks like mine was a little damp still, and it softened some of those marks. If I'm seeing what I think I see, you don't want to put water on top of this area unless it's perfectly dry. And then I blotted it to just make it damp so I could put some pops of orange in this fin. This fin I think is important because it curves around beautifully. And if the viewer's eye follows these interesting marks, and the brighter orange will attract the viewer's eye, and it'll help them move through the turtle, up through that curved fin, up through the painting, back to the turtle's face. So the bright orange helps attract the viewer's eye and tell them, look, this is a fun place to look. And this is a place to look that will lead your eye because it curves up into the turtle, back up into the turtle, back into the main area of interest. So I was playing with about cream consistency. It looks like milk consistency, but with a blotted brush on damp paper to just make hints of markings with the Pyrrole orange. damp enough that it makes my mark soft, but dry enough that it lets them kind of hold their shape a little bit and not bloom out too much. All right, that's my French ultramarine. Got my little flat 1/4 inch flat, and I'm mixing it with my Naphthol red to get, and I'm mixing it with just the junk, the burnt sienna, pyrrole, to get a really grayed down purple. This purple was perfect for the markings of this turtle. I really like this mix of ultramarine blue, Naphthol red, pyrrole orange to make it a little pyrrole orange. You want it to look purple, but a grayed down purple. So you can gray down purple by adding orange to it. And now I'm going to get this fin damp with just a little bit of water. I should have painted that fin that I'm working on now as part of the shadow shape. I've painted this again since this painting, and I painted this fin as if it was part of the shadow shape of the underbelly and the other fin. But I forgot to think in that way when I was painting it initially, but I'm just getting it wet. I'm blotting at it because I want it only damp. I want the markings I'm going to paint to hold their shape, and I'm going to paint them first with mostly pyrrole orange. Where the sun is hitting the fin, they're going to be bright. But this looks like it's mostly my pyrrole orange and my burnt sienna cream consistency on damp paper. So my approach to this is painting the markings first, then I'll let them completely dry, and then I'll paint the shadow over them later. So you can paint it as an underpainting like I did with the other ones, or you can paint the shadow over it after the markings dry. That's two different ways. And when you paint the shadow over them after they dry, it'll soften them and make them look quieter and more softer edged. So this is cream consistency on damp. Getting a little bit of my purple mix there with red, French ultramarine, cream consistency. And I'm going to drop a little bit into parts of these markings so it just softly blurs into the marking because it's still wet. Futzing. I'm just futzing. I'm trying to get a little bit of water in there to see if I can get it to mix a little bit more and create a little bit of texture. I'm dropping like half drops of water just to mess with these markings, probably more than I need to. My edges got a little rough. That brush is so old and it has rough edges. I think it was making messy edges, and I was just smoothing them out with a damp brush. This is probably a 4 round silver black velvet. I'm going to spray this to loosen these up a little bit with a mist. You want a misting sprayer. Just a little bit, then you can blot at them. And now they're running a lot. So, here you go. This is part of the artistic process, is just putting something down, seeing how you like it. If you don't like it, adjust. Spray, blot, scrub, whatever. I'm going to put in some brighter orange now. And because I sprayed them, blotted them, now they have a little bit more texture. So I don't hate the effect I got from kind of futzing with these. Getting some more French ultramarine, putting a little bit of dark in part of each marking, just futzing with them. If I wanted to, I could blot them again if I didn't like them and change it again. Putting a little bit more of that purple in these. I really wanted these to have some pretty stark darks in them because they are in the center of interest. So I wanted some really strong markings in this area. So I'll futz with these a lot more than other ones, farther away from the area of interest, which is the face of the turtle, because it's in the most important area. So I just added a little bit more of that purple gray mix to give them a bit more pop, a little bit more darkness, to call the viewer's attention to them in this super light area. Look how the markings, because we painted them on damp paper, they almost look like they have a glow. That's that dreamy realism that I love. That's why I love to paint on some level of damp paper. And here we go with some more water. The fun part, I think. See how I'm putting the water along the fin, very drippy, but I'm leaving quite a bit of white dry paper farther out. Oops. Farther out away from the fin, so that I do get some rivulets of drippy paint as it will go in a minute. I'll tilt the board up to make this water drip. Getting this area in between this triangle of white damp too, because I'm still not sure what I want to do with this area. I love it white and stark because I love that shape of the triangle that juts up into the turtle's face. So I left the tip of the triangle dry because I really want to save that. All right, now we're going to tip it to get all these drips to drip off the paper. And in that process, they create an interesting path for the paint to follow when we charge it in. Oops, got to clean out my brush. I want some pure, I don't want that burnt sienna in my brush at all. So getting some permanent green light, cream consistency. Isn't it fun to watch the paint do what it wants? It blooms out so pretty. It's just so mesmerizing to watch the paint bloom into this puddle that we've created. And I'm getting some French ultramarine and blotting it into this wet paint. And then tilting. I even banged mine on the table to really give it some oomph to really get it to run, and then to loosen up the edges more. Look how while it's tilted, I spray it and just let it do what it's going to do. Any edge that I saw that was too stark, I sprayed. I could have even done more than that. Now I'm going to drop in some of the PB17, the sky blue. Dropping it in. Dropping in a puddle too to create some interest. Maybe I'll get some blooms out of that. I like that. This is a time where a puddle won't hurt you. Bloom won't hurt you. It'll just look like water. So you can add paint, spray it again, which I will, I'm sure. But you want to make sure you don't overspray and then end up with no sparkles of pure white dry paper. You want to get it to where there are quite a bit of sparkly white paper that stays perfectly dry. So you don't want to mist everything, just enough to get it to drip and to move. How fun is that? I think we need to paint water more often. It's fun. You can't get it wrong. Just relax and enjoy watching the paint, the watercolor paint, do what watercolor paint does best. Dance and mingle and do beautiful things all by itself if you just encourage it with water. To make my water look dynamic, notice I'm leaving some areas lighter and I'm putting in some of this dark cream consistency paint here and there. And then when I spray it, if I spray it, it'll bloom out and create a variety of different colors and values that make it look interesting. Notice as we move away from the turtle's face, I make the wash lighter, more watery, so it dries lighter because I don't want it to be stark and overpowering in areas I don't want the viewer to linger with their eyes. I'm trying to get it to run diagonally up into the side corner, not the perfect corner, notice, but close. And then blotting up any edge paint. You don't want that paint to go soak along the edge like it is. So I'm trying to soak up as much as those drips so I don't get it running along the side of the tape, which will not look good. You want it to run off the painting. You don't want it to run along the edge. So I just keep spraying it to loosen up where I just blotted it. I don't want blot marks in my water. All right, I'm going to get some cream consistency ultramarine blue and get this a little bit darker. This is really wet. So you can see how wet my paper is because how much these blob out. And then when it dries maybe one more minute, I'll give it a splat with some water to let it cauliflower. At least that's what, I actually don't think I did that, but I wish I would have, to put some cool cauliflowers in there so you guys could do that. All right, wasn't that fun? So let your painting dry for literally a minute if you're working on a hot press. If you're working on cold press, let it dry for maybe 3 minutes and then go splat some water in that area that we just did and let it cauliflower. I wish I would have thought to do that. I just didn't. Sometimes I forget. But how fun is this turtle, right? And let it do what it wants to do with a little bit of guidance from you as the artist, but let the watercolor do the work by painting on the wet paper. We still have more water to do. I think what we're going to do next is the eye and all those interesting colors in the eye area that the reference actually gave us. There's almost like a rainbow of color in the eye area that's going to be fun to play up. So I look forward to doing that with you. And take a rest. Sleep on your painting. Don't push it. Relax. Enjoy and savor the process. I usually paint these kind of paintings over a series of many days. I don't do a painting like this in one day. Absolutely not. You got to sleep on it. You got to let it rest. You got to come back super fresh and really enjoy it and savor it. All right. I will see you in session 3. But until then, go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.